name is Joe Maartens. I'm based at Kelvin Grove campus at the Institute of Health and Biomedical Innovation. And this afternoon I'm going to talk to you about publication bias and startup success. And we're going to use the immunotherapy sector as a case study to discuss this topic. So why immunotherapy? I've got a smattering of articles that highlight some of the highlights of what's happened in this industry over the last decade. And I'll give you just a few other examples of what's transpired. Firstly, in 2012, we had a young girl called Emily Whitehead, and you can see her on YouTube. She was 6 years old, going on 7, had terminal cancer, leukemia, got the therapy, and was in remission within a month. In 2013, Science, as you can see, cancer therapy on the right-hand side, Science declared cancer immunotherapy as a breakthrough therapy of the year. And then fast forward a few years, in 2017 we had the first ever approval by the FDA, and followed then by the EMA in Europe and the TGA in Australia, of the gene-modified cell therapy. First ever approvals that happened in end of 2017. And that pretty much says a lot of what has happened. It's been an exciting field, and there's so much happened. So we used this field to examine this aspect. When we just change tack a little bit and look at the financing of a startup, many of you, or some of you, may have been involved with trying to get your idea from a germ that you're really excited about into something that's commercially viable. And there's a route that you take to get funding. And the first part of that route that you follow is called the Valley of Death, and not for unknown reasons, because it certainly is hard once you've spoken to family, fools, and friends to support you in your venture. You often find yourself, you're still not out of that valley, and you still need to get more funding to advance your idea. So the hypothesis that we had is what does publishing in Science and Nature do to that journey? And so that's what we're investigating. And so just to give you, I guess, an overview of global sector financing for this field of advanced therapies and regenerative medicine, I want to focus your attention on that fourth cluster, venture capital. You can see over the last few years that's really gone up almost exponentially. Go to the far left and you see initial public offerings. This is where a company goes public and they offer their shares on the market. And then just next to that, the follow-ons, you can see the amazing numbers. So you're talking about in the billions of dollars that's flowed into the sector. Where funding normally would have been a big issue, it certainly in this field seems to be not so. There are other issues at play. So when we framed our study, we asked these three questions. We said, is a researcher from a top-ranked university more likely to get published in these top journals like Science and Nature? And if a researcher is from a top university and has published in Science and Nature, what's the likelihood of that person actually getting startup seed funding for his or her venture? And then if you look at the companies being funded, are those that are based on research from non-top universities, on average, more successful than those from the top echelon? So the idea there is that you have to work so much harder to make inroads into the venture capitalist space to get support. Does that mean you have a better product? And so these questions we framed and as the headline for our study. What we did in terms of methodology, we had a particular query on the Scopus database, extracted a subset of papers that address this field. Obviously there you have the authors and you have their affiliations, and then also the other bibliographic data that comes along with that. Interestingly, what we were then looking for in a subset of those papers was the ethics declarations, where an author declares, I have founded or co-founded a startup called X. And when we've got the name of X, we can then use Crunchbase as an online tool to go and interrogate the funding of that company X. So in this space, normally you'd also be interested in what's happening on the patent landscape, and so the lens, which is born from our own university, is a very useful tool in terms of being able to get a bird's eye view of this landscape. So we tied these three sets tools and three sets of data together to give us that overall picture from where our data could be mined and analyzed. And so just a bit of descriptive data you can see in the leftmost column. Publications in this field have certainly escalated, and you can see especially again over the last 5 years, over the last 10 years, really gone up in both sides. In other words, the science nature space and also the other space. If you look at the highest ranking author of papers, you can also see a skewness towards the more prestigious universities. When you take all authors, the skewness is less marked, but it's still there. And then on the right-hand side, we've got a correlation between journal ranking and affiliation ranking, and you can see that positive regression curve certainly tells you a story there. Moving on, in terms of citation differences, we found that in the Nature Science cohort, there's twice as many citations on average as compared to the others. On the patent side, however, there's not much difference. You can't really differentiate. So there's many scholarly works, in fact, that are not cited by patents, whether they're science or nature or otherwise. So when we did our multivariate analysis correlation, we then, in the left-hand column, we found that you have that which sounds, I guess, intuitively wrong. Why isn't it positive? But in this instance, our affiliation ranking is the lower the score, the higher, the more prestigious the institution or university. So that's why that is there. So there's a marked correlation on affiliation ranking versus scholarly citations. You see the same on patent citations versus the affiliation ranking, although markedly different, or shall we say less. And then when you go to, on the right-hand side, you see the positive correlation fitting to the data that compares scholarly citations to patent citations. So the more scholarly citations you get, it seems to correlate well with patent citations as well. So this is looking at the data that we have, and just to summarize then, what we found was institutional prestige attracts scholarly citations. We had institutional prestige also attracting patent citations, and as you saw, to a lesser degree, but still so. The more authors you had on a paper, I didn't show the data, but we found the more authors you had on a paper, the more citations you got. And then also that correlation between scholarly citations and patent citations, certainly one worth considering. So we're still in the process of analyzing the data, but the future work, as we envisage, would involve not just looking at Science and Nature as the journals of representation for this field, and also include something like the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine. We'd want to investigate lower ranking journals as a data source, and to see what does that tell us about the path to startups and funding, and then also include some form of survival analysis on these startups, because currently the measure for success of a startup focuses largely on if you're still around after 5 years, and then either having gone public, or on the other hand being acquired by another firm. Those are seen as measures of success, although from our data we found that 5 years is certainly not the be-all and end-all of startup success. It certainly is also informed by, depending on the nature of the business, that those activities, such as being acquired or going public, can take more or less time than the 5 years. So it's not an exclusive indicator of startup success. So, yep, it's been very interesting, and but it's still on the journey. Thank you for listening.